So welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation today. I'm Julia Ralphman from the Community College Research Center, and I'm joined by Jacob Hofstetter from the Migration Policy Institute. We're going to be discussing the Adult Education English as a Second Language, or ESL, federal and state policy landscape and its implications for community college providers of adult education ESL, including the challenges they face and the promising practices that are emerging from the field. And I know we have a few folks in the room and maybe more online, so I was just going to ask about sort of roles. So who here is an adult educator? Perfect. And is anyone an advisor or navigator or any other role, I would say? Excellent. Okay, perfect. And then online, if you could maybe type your roles in the chat, that would be great. If you're a policymaker, if you're an adult educator, career coach, any other kind of role, just so that we know who we have in the room. And also, if you have any questions online, please feel free to put your questions in the chat and we will make sure to get to them at the end of the presentation. There we go. So the Community College Center, just a little bit about where I'm coming from. The Community College Research Center focuses on research that helps community colleges expand opportunity and aims to improve student outcomes. And our work really has a strong equity lens, especially for underserved populations like multilingual learners, which I'll talk about in a minute, who are a growing and diverse presence on community college campuses. We're based at Teachers College, Columbia University in New York City. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jake, who will introduce his.
Hi, everyone, and hi to everyone online as well. So my name's Jake Hofstetter, and I'm a policy analyst with the Migration Policy Institute's National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. The Migration Policy Institute, or MPI, is an independent, nonpartisan think tank located in Washington, D.C. And we do a lot of different research related to migration and immigration and integration policy. Specifically within MPI, I work at the National Center on Immigrant Integration Policy. We focus exclusively on immigrant integration in the United States, working at the federal, state, and local levels. You can see some of our primary areas of work up here on the screen. My work is mostly in the adult education and workforce development space, as well as in language access too. So in the adult education and workforce development space, we do a lot of thinking and research around how these systems and the policy frameworks that govern them intersect with immigrants and issues related to immigrant integration as well as adult English learning, as we'll be talking about today. So very excited to be with you.
So today's session will hopefully help you understand better the federal and state adult education ESL policy context landscape and how it shapes community college practices. We'll look at how these policies affect multilingual learners, the barriers that community colleges face in providing adult education ESL, and what strategies are working. And then we'll end with some policy and practice recommendations, as well as discussion questions to consider for your own institutions. And at this point, I'm going to hand it back over to Jake just to talk more about the adult education policy landscape.
Hey, everyone. So my job today is basically to provide some big context and overview for the more specific research that Julia's done on community colleges. So to do that, I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about data, unpacking some of the data we have on adult English learners. Discussing a little bit about adult education and adult English learning as well, though I think folks both online and in the room are pretty well versed in a lot of that. And then I'm going to take a brief moment to talk about the policy framework of WIOA Title II and some of the limitations that we see come along with that as well, all of which I hope sort of funnels down into what Julia will be talking about today as well. So based on the American Community Survey, we know that there are almost 25 million adults in the United States with limited proficiency in English as of 2023. This is likely an undercount. So for folks who are familiar with this, the way that limited proficiency in English is measured is folks self-report on the census forms. They say if they speak English, not at all, not well, well, very well, or natively. And folks who mark not at all, not well, and well are marked as limited English proficient. However, at the same time, there are probably a lot of folks who speak English very well who are also in need of adult English programs as well in some cases. So just to say that this is likely more of a floor as opposed to a ceiling of the number of folks who need these types of services. I just want to point out something that's come out in some of the data analyses that we've done as census data as well, that these millions of LEP adults are not just individuals who need instruction in English. Many of them also have less than a high school diploma or equivalent, especially from their countries of origin. I'm sure this is something that a lot of folks encounter in their programming and their day-to-day work as well. But just to give sort of some context and some numbers. So we know that 23% of all immigrant adults, based on our previous data analyses, have less than a high school diploma or equivalent and are also have limited proficiency in English. Again, just indicating that these folks are almost adult learners in two ways, with one being one in their native language or their primary language, and then also in English as well. So this can just create additional barriers. And I always think this is important to raise that about half, so we think about, or sorry, based on our data analyses, about 50% of immigrant adults are LEP, and you can see about half of those, or 23%, have LEP and have less than a high school diploma or equivalent. So this is a really big issue that affects a lot of LEP individuals as well. And I just want to note within that too, that there's also a really significant population of adult English learners who not only don't have a high school diploma or equivalent, but actually can have less than a ninth or less than a fifth grade level of education, typically from their home countries or countries of origin as well. I'm so excited about this map. I'm going to try not to spend too much time on this. Let me move the video box so you all can see it a little more. So this is a map of states by LEP population. This is over age 5. It's not adults. I didn't have time to do the adults version, but I would like to do that in the future. So I'll definitely share that with folks once it's done. But basically, the darker the blue a state is, the larger population of LEP individuals it has. So California has the most with 6.439 million. You can see Texas and Florida each having over 2 million, as well as New York. And then Illinois and New Jersey both have over 1 million. And these are sort of these traditional immigrant dense states that we think of in terms of LEP individuals. However, I think it's also really important to note that there's no states here that have zero LEP individuals or adult English learners as well, right? The smallest state is Vermont, which has 7,000. And all of the states which are sort of this lightest shade of blue or gray, whatever you would call that, all have under 50,000 LEP individuals. So that includes Alaska, Mississippi, West Virginia, Vermont, New Hampshire, Maine, and then this cluster of states in the Mountain West as well. And I just point that out because even these states that have the smallest LEP populations still could have up to 50,000 individuals there as well. So this is really a 50-state issue. And also, I think when you dig into this map as well, we'll post the slides in case you want to get into it more as well. You can look at states like Ohio or Michigan or Colorado, or even places like Nebraska, Missouri, and Tennessee that also have really significant LEP populations as well. And I'm sure this is something that folks see in their work every day, but I also think it's just important to give this sense of scale and this context as well. So again, I think this will be sort of a no-brainer for a lot of folks who work in the field, but I always think it's important just to draw attention to this. The way that I come at the adult education system is generally through this lens of immigrant integration. And I think it's always just important to uplift the fact that the adult education system is really the primary source of educational and training services for immigrant adults that helps promote their economic, civic, and linguistic education in the United States. And I think that's something that folks know just from working in the field, but I also think it's always important just to state that, even from an outside perspective as well, that this is a really key system, which is not always treated or funded as such as well. This is evident even in the numbers of individuals served in WIOA Title II programs. So participants in English acquisition focused programs under WIOA Title II, which include English language acquisition and IELCE programs, comprised over half of all those served under WIOA Title II in program year 2022. This has been pretty consistently about half of folks served for a long time. It's actually starting to tick upwards as well. Yet I think it's also important to note that our research at MPI indicates that the system meets less than 5% of the need for English instruction. This is largely due to capacity issues. It's due to funding issues. This is not really due to the ability of programs or providers or their willingness to serve individuals. It's really just the limited amounts of funding for the overwhelming need for for English instruction for adults as well. And I think it's also important to note that this isn't just need. It's not just the system serves X number, but there's Y number of people. We also know from a lot of anecdotal data and more qualitative data that there's long waiting lists for English programs, which also just reflect that there's a lot of demand for these services that aren't being met as well. And so my final slide before I turn it over to Julia is that I just want to talk a little bit about WIOA Title II as well. This is something that's come out in a lot of our research at MPI, sort of the impacts of WIOA Title II on the system and on local programs that seek to serve all adult learners, but particularly immigrants and adult English learners as well. And I think this will help frame some of the on-the-ground issues that Julia is going to be talking about as well. Of course, underfunding is an issue, as I've mentioned, for adult English language programs, but I think it's also important to unpack some of the impacts of the policy framework that WIOA has brought as well. Through WIOA's 6 performance measures, which I'm sure you're all more than familiar and maybe sick of reporting on as well, we know that generally, just the way the system works is that programs and providers are incentivized to meet these performance measures. However, these performance measures, things like earning a high school diploma or equivalent, passing a certain score on a standardized test, achieving an industry recognized credential, these are all things that are more attainable for folks who are at a more advanced level or are facing less barriers. So this creates a disconnect between those who are most in need of services. For example, an individual who's maybe at an NRS 1 in English and may have a 9th grade level of education in their home country, systems and programs are not incentivized to serve these individuals who are really facing the biggest barriers. And this affects all types of providers, though I will note that, of course, providers, local programs, and states are constantly trying to find ways to serve these populations. However, this policy disconnect is really a real thing from the top down that continues to impact the system as well. And I know that there's been lots of presentations at this conference that I just want to bear witness to too, of a lot of folks doing amazing work to overcome a lot of these challenges. But I do think it's always important to note that these very real things exist and are imposed on the system from the top down. So with that, I think I'm going to turn it back over to Julia, who's going to present some of her really cool research into community colleges in these topics.
Right. So I know we've been throwing around different terms for this population. I've been using the term multilingual learners, and Jake referenced English learners, LEP adults. So I just wanted to mention that I will be using the term multilingual learner to refer to people who are in the process of learning English, and as a term to refer to students who are currently enrolled in ESL, in either adult education courses or credit ESL programs, but also students who might not be in ESL and are still learning English, and those who might never have been enrolled in ESL. So really referencing that this could be at any status of learning English. I also want to recognize that the label English learner is used as a classification category, a federal designation in K-12 for students in need of English language support. And so that's important to understand as there are consequences of being EL classified. So thinking about, I'm speaking here specifically about the population of multilingual learners in community colleges. I want to emphasize also that this population is not a monolith and that it's very varied and diverse. So there's no systematic approach to really identifying multilingual learners. It's difficult to estimate their numbers in community colleges. However, there have been reports that we've used to sort of estimate that there are between about 500,000 and 800,000 students that are part of the community college, that are multilingual learners and are part of the community college population. And this is a growing population as well. Community colleges actually serve a much wider share of immigrant students than four-year institutions. For example, many internationally trained professionals or ITPs with post-secondary degrees or credentials from other countries enroll in adult education programs, and that grows the population within community colleges as well. And as I mentioned, this population is diverse in that they have a variety of educational backgrounds and numbers of years living in the US. and multilingual learners in both adult education ESL programs and college credit bearing courses may have studied in US public schools, public high schools where they were classified as English learners. They may have limited formal education in the US or elsewhere, and thus need both academic and English language learning support. Some multilingual learners have graduated from high schools in other countries, and some have earned bachelor's or graduate degrees in their home countries. And then there's also a small group of multilingual learners who have international student visas specifically to study in the US and then return to their countries of origin. Um, Also, in terms of their goals, this is a very varied population. So while learning English for everyday use may be a primary goal for many multilingual learners, ESL coursework can really serve a range of purposes, including paths towards employment, post-secondary education, citizenship, and other goals, as I'm sure you're all well aware. Um, and just, I wanted to emphasize here the importance that community colleges and post-secondary institutions can provide in terms of crucial pathways for social and economic mobility of immigrants with low-level English proficiency and lower levels of formal education. So in this graph, which I actually pulled from the Migration Policy Institute, you can just see that immigrant origin students have bolstered enrollment in both 2- and 4-year institutions. In fact, they are the fastest growing student population in US higher education and accounted for 80% of the increase in overall US college enrollment in the past 2 decades. So this is something that is definitely important to consider as we're talking about the multilingual learner population. And Jake talked a little bit about sort of how adult education programs are administered and at the policy level, but just to reemphasize that federal adult education policy is delivered through states, often via departments of education or community college systems. This map is showing that in 16 US states and outlying areas, adult education is administered through community and technical college systems. And community colleges make up a large share of adult education providers nationally, including within states where adult education is administered through state departments of labor, K-12 systems, or other entities. And this is a growing, community colleges are a growing provider of state-administered adult education programs. So talking a little bit about the research that I'm going to present today, it's part of a larger study that we did at CCRC that examined policies and practices impacting multilingual learners at City Colleges of Chicago. Our study in Chicago overall, it aimed to understand how community colleges support adult education ESL students within the constraints of federal and state policies, and focused on the research questions, including who are these students who are in adult education courses? What are their goals and backgrounds? How do policies help or hinder their progress? And what practices help multilingual learners persist and transition into academic or occupational pathways? And the larger study included data collection across the different campuses at the City Colleges of Chicago. We included various stakeholders, including students enrolled in adult education ESL, and we have a number of briefs that will be coming out on that larger study shortly. But the research presented today really focuses mainly and specifically on interviews that were conducted with 28 policymakers, providers, and experts in adult education and ESL, plus a document analysis of federal state adult education policy. And then we also reviewed various data from the National Reporting System and related sources. So our findings from this research really point to opportunities within policy at the federal, state, and institutional levels, and the role that community college-based providers in particular can play in improving adult education, ESL program access, and outcomes. The first takeaway here from our research really highlights the many advantages that community colleges offer in serving multilingual learners, including existing instructional and support resources, partnerships with community-based organizations and government agencies, and structures that can support transitions into academic and occupational pathways. Community colleges are really uniquely positioned to help close the skills gap by providing this affordable, accessible pathway to post-secondary education and training. Um, and they also have a support infrastructure that can help multilingual learners persist through long course sequences. As Jake mentioned, we know that there are various levels that students go through as they go through these ESL sequences. And so many times community colleges have support services, wraparound support that they can offer adult education students as well. They can also leverage additional funding sources to deliver career-focused programs like IETs. And it's really important just to note that for students enrolled in adult education, ESL specifically, who may experience marginalization while learning a new language and navigating unfamiliar community college systems and services, supports like intensive advising are even more profound and impactful for them. Unpredictable job schedules, family commitments, and residential mobility may also affect their persistence. And so to have supports is really essential and critical for these students. However, I will also mention that while these infrastructures and community colleges offer support services, multilingual learners, especially those in adult education, may experience unique barriers to using these resources, including a lack of information, language barriers, scheduling challenges. Many times they might only be offered to the credit division or students in credit-bearing courses. And so that can also be a challenge. However, there's many community college-based providers who have made efforts to really implement tailored supports to multilingual learners. One support that we saw at the City Colleges of Chicago was called a transition specialist, and this person provided coaching and career navigation to students who were in adult education ESL, who had aspirations of post-secondary education or training. They even engaged in sort of outreach within like classroom orientations to reach lower level adult education ESL students. Um, there's a number of other sort of roles like this. There are career navigators that we also found through our research as an important role for students, as well as CBOs that community colleges worked with. And they really help to provide, for example, supports and services related to resettlement, employment, and basic needs. There was one program in Chicago called Scale It. It's a CBO that operates as a one-stop operator within the American Job Center system, and they work closely with community college-based adult education ESL providers to help individuals get connected to adult education ESL programs. They actually pioneered a career pathways navigator model that they're intending to scale nationally. So just these are some things that I think there are affordances of the community college system, but also critical things to pay attention to that this population needs. And so my next finding that I will present from this study is, like other providers, community colleges can struggle to support multilingual learners through the federally and state policy guided lengthy course sequencing, as well as performance accountability requirements that can create barriers to student persistence. And Jake mentioned a little bit about the challenges with those performance metrics. So the interviewees from our study reported that getting students to persist through these lengthy ESL courses, rather sequences, is one of the biggest challenges to their progression into an occupational training or post-secondary path or academic pathway, rather. As a result, more often than not, access to these pathways is restricted to those with higher levels of English proficiency. In many cases, I think students had to be at a level 5 or higher to enter into certain programs that were intended to lead to occupational pathways. And as mentioned previously, multilingual learners who are enrolled in adult education ESL courses can have very different goals. And so given the way that adult education is set up in this very like highly regulated political system, but very highly regulated policy system, it can be a challenge for students with particular goals, especially those who may want to transition onto a credit-bearing pathway. And then in addition, just mentioning also the performance accountability measures, standalone placement tests like the ones used for the performance accountability measures and the measurable skills gains, they assess a very limited set of skills. And in some cases, we actually saw in Chicago that students were testing on some of these tests that weren't measuring what they even learned in the classroom. So it creates barriers for a lot of students who are in adult education ESL. And we saw that they tended to serve sort of a gatekeeping function, given that post-tests also determined if a student could potentially move on to the next level in the ESL class sequence. So just lastly, this third finding is our research has shown how community college providers are managing to create better pathways for students in this highly regulated, constrained policy environment. For example, City Colleges of Chicago is revising the level at which students can actually start occupational training. So now they can start at a level lower than 5. And they've also, community college-based adult education providers have also developed other pathway approaches, including City Colleges of Chicago, such as bridge programs intended to expand access to academic or vocational programs, programs like iBest, and bridge models that combine ESL with vocational training have shown positive results. We've also heard in our research about the formation of other kinds of non-traditional IETs, including a CBO that partnered, actually in Texas, that partnered with community colleges on a program for small business owners. It was a business entrepreneurship program that was taught partially in Spanish, so it's specifically for Spanish speakers. And at the end of this program, students had to develop and present a business plan in English. So thinking about the ways in which native language can also be intertwined with this programming. Despite the current adult education policy framing, the realities on the ground suggest that, like other local provider types, community college-based providers face a lot of challenges in implementing these kinds of IETs or career pathways programs, because these models tend to be more resource intensive in an already underfunded environment, and they require coordination with workforce system partners. So although they're great models, it is very hard to implement them as well, and they're not as widely adopted across the country. And yeah, I think those are my findings. So I'll go on to key considerations. So in thinking about these insights on the affordances and challenges that community colleges offer as providers of adult education ESL, a number of considerations emerge. So first, expanding and sustaining funding streams for adult education ESL programming and wraparound services, especially those that target multilingual learners, would be great. I know funding is uncertain right now, but obviously more funding to expand those services would be critical. And then also support services tailored specifically for multilingual learners, like navigators, coaches, and outreach. They're essential for their persistence, and we really saw that. And so emphasizing the importance of those roles is something to think about. Additionally, strengthening partnerships between community colleges and community-based organizations, workforce systems, and immigrant serving agencies. These kinds of relationships can expand outreach, transition supports, and can offer co-enrollment opportunities like IETs. And just, again, emphasizing that there need to be more flexible and integrated pathways such as bridge programs, co-enrollment models that really allow for a smoother transition. We have seen in community colleges, there's a rigid division between credit and non-credit programming. And so that transition could definitely be made smoother. And so there need to be some thoughts about pathway models that would allow for that. And just lastly, I didn't talk about this as much, but promoting professional development for faculty and staff to better understand the needs of multilingual learners, including trauma-informed approaches, culturally responsive teaching, and advising best practices, as we know that this population comes with a very diverse background, educational background, and experiences. And so that would definitely be well suited for faculty and staff who are teaching these students. Obviously, these shifts require both policy changes and institutional commitment in order to be implemented. And let me just shift the next slide to Jake, who will give some larger scale key considerations.
Great. So once again, here, I'm just going to zoom out a little bit to finish the presentation, to talk a bit about some key considerations from our research that I think really help really help contextualize a lot of what the great research and considerations that Julia was presenting as well. And I think a lot of these things, again, may be fairly obvious for folks working in the field, but at the same time, I think that they're really important to state directly and also to show the evidence. I've added links to our different studies that address a lot of these issues as well, which may be helpful for folks who need to share these types of findings with decision makers or policymakers or other folks that you might be liaising with as well. So we know that adult English learners or multilingual learners, whatever term you would want to use, do face shared barriers compared to US-born participants. This can include things like poverty, lack of childcare, lack of access to transportation. However, adult English learners, particularly those who were born in other countries, also face their own unique barriers. I think in particular, something important to note is cultural and systems navigation, understanding basically how to navigate American society, socialization to workplace norms, to just understanding basically how things work, a lot of cases in different contexts in the United States as well. These are all unique barriers that adult English learners face in a lot of cases. And our research, which is linked in this first piece as well, the 2023 report that we had come out, also dives into just demographically how different many adult English learners and immigrant adult learners are from their US-born counterparts as well. In addition to English proficiency, things like levels of formal education, legal status, eligibility for benefits, also play a really big role in determining what service approaches and what programmatic elements might be appropriate for different populations. And this really brings me into the second piece. And I think what Julia was talking about was really folks in Chicago and Texas and other places really putting this idea into action. But just this idea that many approaches that have been sort of previously accepted and embraced by the field, like integrated education and training, may require different considerations for adult English learners as well. So there's just this extra layer of considerations and work that needs to be done to ensure that these programs are accessible and also effective in serving this population as well. For example, we did a large-scale study of the Integrated English Literacy and Civics Education, or IELCE program. And one of the main findings we have was in trying to support the participation of immigrant adults in these types of intensive part-time or even full-time workforce programs was that folks weren't eligible for benefits in the same way that US-born individuals were. So in a lot of cases, US-born individuals were able to participate in workforce development programs via support via SNAP, TANF, and other public benefits as well, that many immigrant students were just not eligible for. So providers found themselves building programs that ultimately folks, unless they were going to work 2 jobs, not sleep, not take care of their children, were really just not going to be able to participate in. So these types of really intensely practical things are really important to talk about and to consider. I also think that Julia made the excellent point as well, as something that comes out in our own research as well, is just the level of English that's required to participate in a lot of these models and approaches as well, is already at an advanced level that in a lot of cases can really exclude really many adult English learners, even those who might have a fairly advanced level of English too. And I know this is something, again, that I've seen a lot of amazing presentations at this conference of folks doing things to address this, to develop programs and approaches that get at this population and try to serve those who are at lower levels of English or formal education. But at the same time, it is a really important consideration. And that actually segues really well into the third thing I want to talk about here as well, which is as constraining as federal policy can be, and as constraining and frustrating as WIOA Title II can be, there's also lots of opportunities for states, localities, and even individual providers to develop their own approaches separate from WIOA. We had a publication come out in 2018 entitled English Plus Integration, which really delved into different ways that states could create additional flexibility to essentially develop programs to serve integration of immigrants or adult English language learners outside of their WIOA Title II programs as well. This also exists at the local level. For example, New York City has had its own grant program, which also complements adult literacy as well, and even individual providers too. I think Julia's presentation and a lot of the other presentations at this conference have really spoken to the way that individual providers can braid funding and develop their own approaches to really get around a lot of these frustrations in the system that folks, I think, encounter as well. And I think more broadly, this just speaks to the reality that a lot of the innovation, a lot of the new models and approaches that are really promising are really coming from the bottom up in the system as opposed from the federal down, which in a lot of cases seems to be more of a constraint, a barrier, or a frustration for folks who are actually doing the work in the field as well. And just finally, this wasn't originally going to be in our slides, but I think it's just important to recognize the reality that we find ourselves in as well, that there's a changing context for serving multilingual learners and adult English learners as well that we find ourselves in. This is both federal policy shifts, whether that's related to immigration, to cuts at OCTAE, to potential cuts in funding to WIOA Title II. And I think just more broadly, what this creates is a sense of new uncertainty. I've been coming to COABE for a number of years and talking about these different issues. And I think this is really a time where there are a lot of uncharted waters ahead. Perhaps we always had a sense that this might come, but I think it's really concrete and tangible, the extent to which this federal policy shifts and this uncertainty may impact programs and providers. At the same time, and I'd also flag, my colleague Margie McHugh gave a presentation yesterday that really delved into a lot of the different federal immigration policy changes that may have an impact on students and programs as well, that I'd encourage you to check out on the Whova app if you haven't already too. But I do just want to close with the reality. I'm not going to scroll all the way back through the slides, but I think I would go back to that map of the number of LEP individuals in the country. And just that fundamental reality is that there's going to be continue to be a need for English instruction across different providers and systems, whether that's through community colleges, whether that's through community-based organizations or other adult ed providers. So I think despite the uncertainty, that reality remains and will continue to foster a high level of demand for these services as well. So I think we are going to open it up to questions and comments now. For those of you online, you can go ahead and put any questions or comments in the chat. And I know we have some folks in the room as well who we thank for braving the 8 a.m. session and coming in. So we appreciate you all being here. And if you have questions or comments as well, we're happy to answer those. And before we dig into that too, we do have some discussion questions. I'll come back to this slide, but I just want to flag, and we will upload these slides to the app as well, that I have my emails up here. I also have, I cited a lot of these different reports from MPI that we've had come out, but you can also just find the link to them on this last page as well. And Julia and my contact is on the last slide as well. But I'll go back to discussion questions. And if folks have any questions, yeah, sure. Here you go. You can just look at our email real quick. And yeah, so I'll go ahead and open it up for questions either online or in the room, or comments too. We welcome folks to share their experiences as well. Did everybody get this? Can I go back to the discussion questions? Okay, great. Do folks have any reactions or questions or comments that they want to share? Sure.
Not related to those discussion questions.
Yeah, you can ask whatever you want to.
This was a great presentation. Thank you both very much. On the map where you identified states where adult education is under Department of Labor and also under the community college system, have you done a comparison of how effective are the differences in effectiveness? Yeah.
No, and I can go back to the slide you're referencing. We have not, but that would be an awesome study to do. And no, we haven't done that yet. This is sort of just, we're delving in of adult education programming, at least at CCRC, but hoping to expand the research. So, but that's a great suggestion.
So we're under Department of Labor, but sometimes I wish we were under the community college system. But I mean, it's just a gut feeling. I really have no evidence on why I wish that. One other comment real quick. Sometimes when you're on a community college campus, it's not just tuition and fees that's a barrier, but our adult ed students do not have access to support services offered by the college for their tuition paying students. And that's a big need that we have. For example, mental health support. So
Yeah, for sure. And we're actually coming out with a brief. We've been trying to publish this brief, but it will look more so at like students who are trying to transition from adult education, non-credit programming to the credit programming division. And it does get into sort of like the lack of supports that are available to adult education ESL students and kind of this othering of adult education ESL. So definitely a great point. Thank you.
Okay, we did have a comment that came through as well from Leah, sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name, that I think that professors could learn a lot from adult education providers about how to best work with English language learners as well. I'll let you take that one.
Professors, meaning professors, I'm assuming in like the credit division, perhaps. Yes, 100%. I agree. And again, I think it goes to sort of these, and you all know way better than I am as you're on the ground doing the work, but I do feel like these rigid divisions, right? Again, the separation between adult education and credit bearing courses, faculty, a lot of times folks on the credit side have no idea what's happening in adult education and vice versa. And we really found that at our City Colleges of Chicago work. It was sort of like they had no idea what the ESL curriculum was in adult education ESL, and those folks didn't have an idea of the curriculum in the credit-bearing ESL courses. And so I guess I'm going on a tangent, but I think that that definitely points to the need for more collaboration and learning from each other across both of those divisions, if possible.
Yeah, that would, I guess, a follow-up question of that is, and I guess in your experience, research or whatever, when we have adult education ESL students transition from the adult education to the academic part of the community college, in your experience, I mean, what programs do better jobs as far as accommodating, communicating? Because sometimes part of the issue is the instructors or the professors don't know how to accommodate or how to modify what they do to make it more accessible to ESL learners or multiple language learners.
That is a great question. Um, I don't honestly, I don't think I would say there's one like department or, faculty that does that transition better. I would also say, I think this relates to your question, even when students are moving from a credit, I hate saying credit ESL because they're not really getting credit for ESL, but what some colleges call academic ESL pathways and move on to like college level English, for example. Even in looking at that, many times those faculty in the English department don't know how to support multilingual learners or students who are coming from ESL courses. And so I think you raise an interesting point in that supports are needed throughout a student's pathway. I feel like there needs to be language supports once students even get into credit-bearing courses and college level, English and math, whatever it is. And so I think that's like a consistent problem, both in academic ESL and then moving from adult education ESL as well. Yeah.
Sorry, you mind just talking into it so folks online? I know.
We have I mean, for example, giving students like PowerPoint decks or presentation ahead of time. recording the class. So, they're, recording it audio or video so that the student can go back and review it. So we have kind of broached that. It's just, again, it's the issue of just not having experience and accommodating, or kind of some rigidity or resistance to accommodating. It's like, you're supposed to be at this level and I'm not going to accommodate. If you can't keep up, that's your problem, which you do encounter. But for the most part, I think they want to help. It's just, how, I guess, having more communication and discussion as far as accommodating people to make that transition.
You get the whole.
You gave us the example earlier of in Texas, there's a college that has a small program for small business owners. And you've mentioned City College of Chicago often. Are there other colleges that have a lot of success transitioning adulthood into community colleges that we could look at online or something?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are multiple examples. I think I gave like the best examples. There's also a lot of work. A lot of work has been done on the iBest program in Washington State that we've looked into. So there are some good programs to look at there. I'm trying to think off the top of my head where else I have seen sort of successful transitions. I think those are the main like examples, but we are, again, we're coming forth with some briefs and reports that hopefully you all, our website, I hope I have up here, but anyway, it will be on our website and you can definitely contact me and I can forward you all the publications as they come out, but those will highlight specific programs as well. But that's a great question.
If I can make a plug too, I know that Maryland does a lot of really exciting work in this space. At least they were, when we were doing work on IELCE, they were doing a lot of really interesting IETs and stuff like that. So happy to share some of that with you as well.
Is it possible to share which school did the business entrepreneurship, or is that private information?
Although I don't know if I can get to it, but anyway, it's the CBO is called. It's called AE ESL is the CBO, and they work with. I'll say that again just for the online folks. It's called PAVE. Is the CBO, and it's in East Texas, and they work, I think they serve a number of community colleges, but specifically I think their biggest community college partnership is with Tyler Junior College. I forget exactly what it stands for at the moment, but they just changed their name.
If folks have any other questions or comments, like we're happy to hang around and chat too if you want. I know folks might want to go get some more coffee or Diet Dr. Pepper. We are in Texas. So we'll go ahead and just pause for now. But if you're online, if you want to add any chat or questions that you have in the Whova app, we can address those. We'll upload the slides as well. There'll also be a recording of this, as I think a lot of folks know too. But thanks so much for getting up early and joining us here. We appreciate you being here, both in person and online.
Thank you so much.